Hello everyone and welcome to this video about coverage, broad match and smart bidding. I'm very excited to share a lot of learnings and insights that I've acquired for the past 8 months where I've been working very close on helping agencies and advertisers test and successfully also test broad match together with smart bidding in order to find more clients at the same or lower cost that they're paying today. A little bit about myself. My name is Nima. I wrote my bachelor about mobile search. I wrote my master's about voice search. So it's no surprise to a lot of people that I work as a search specialist here at Google. You have so much great stuff in store for you today. So thank you so much for watching. I want to make sure that this is worth your time. So there's a lot of, hands-on guidance, best practices, insights, everything you really need to get started with broad match and smart bidding, to test and to implement whatever you feel comfortable with. Let's give it a go. Right before we start, I just want to share a story with you because I want to set the scene for the presentation today. 8 or 7 years ago, when I started online marketing, I went into my one-on-one with my manager back then, who's a phenomenal, standout guy, really great, the best manager, one of the best managers I've had in my career. And I asked him, what do I need to do to become the best at online marketing, like the top 10 in this country or in this industry? Do I need to learn to code in JavaScript so I can create like complex tracking setups, or write great content, do copywriting, write the most popular blog posts so I can acquire a lot of traffic and links? If you're into SEO, you get that reference. Or do I need to become a great graphic designer so I could create like UI, infographics, all of that jazz? And looked at me and said, no, Nima, listen, if I line up the top 10 people that I know in this industry, they all have different strengths, different skills, uh, but there's just one thing they have in common. Okay, what is that one thing? He told me the one thing that they have in common is the following: they have an open mindset. I was very young, so I kind of challenged him a little bit. It's like, what do you mean open mindset? That's so generic. He said, well, they have an open mindset uh, towards everything that's new. And that what that really means is that every time there's some new technology or there's a new strategy, they test, they go into it with an open mind. Even if it feels uncomfortable, even if they personally don't believe that it might necessarily work, they still test it, because what they understand is that if you don't test, you stand still, you don't develop yourself, you're not ahead of the curve, you're not seeing what's going to happen around the corner. Um, and so I really took that to heart. And since that meeting, I've always reminded myself, and when someone presented something that I thought was, ridiculous, or it's never going to work, or it's too crazy, or it's too boring, I always told myself, well, you got to test it, you got to understand how it works, and if it truly is beneficial for you. And even if the test fails, doesn't bring the results in that I expected, I was hoping for, I still learned a lot from it. So today, I encourage you to have an open mind. I encourage you to test, to see if broad match together with smart bidding can work for you. As I said, we've done numerous tests across Northern Europe, finance, retail, like every vertical, every industry, every category. And we've seen amazing results across the board. Full transparency, not every test has been successful, but we've seen enough that I would say the majority have been. And in the ones that weren't successful, we learned a lot of great things about what we need to work on and what we need to improve in order to become successful. And I'm going to also highlight the missteps so you can avoid them when you're setting up your test. So with an open mind and willingness to test and try new things, to learn and become one of the best in the industry, let's get started. Just want to warm up a little bit with match types. If you know the four match types we have at Google, it's exact, it's phrase, it's broad match modifier, and it's broad match. Most of you are probably running with exact. Maybe some of you are running with phrase. Most of you are probably also running with broad match modifier. And some of you are already running with broad match. I've been surprised myself when I've talked with agency that told me, well, they've been running with broad match and smart bidding for 2 or 3 years. It's not a really something that's new or a big deal, but to many of our clients and agencies, it is new. And if it's new to you, if you're just getting started testing now, what I want you to get away with from this specific slide, this introduction, is you don't want to miss out on a sale because you didn't have the right match type. In other words, you don't want to lose out on a sale because your match types were too restrictive. And there's a great example here on the screen that you see next to me. You see exact match, and then you see the brackets, women's hats. That's what this advertiser is advertising for. And then you see match queries, right? So what are the queries that are being matched to that match type? And you look at the exact match and you see women's hats and hats for women. Phrase match, you see women's hats on sale, window women hats, and broad match. You see some examples, but then you go to in broad match modifier, you see summer women hats and so forth. But then you go to broad match, and that's where things get really interesting, because suddenly you see hats for adventurous ladies. Now, you weren't actually eligible to run on that query before because you were limited by the match type that you had inside your account. But now you're actually able to acquire new customers by adding a more broader match type. And that, of course, is going to it's going to raise a lot of questions that we need to address, and that I will address in this session, because we have to discuss then, how does it work? Do we just open the gates to all queries? How do we make sure that the performance follows through? How do I optimize? What do I do with my ads? There's a lot of great questions, and I'm trying to see if we can cover all of them in this session. Broad match is not that different from broad match modifier. It's actually the same keyword from a technical point of view. The only difference is that you have a modifier on the broad match keyword. So if you're already running with broad match modifier today, it's not that crazy. It's not that big step to move to broad match. It probably is to some people who's been in the industry for a long time and maybe have some negative connotation associated with broad match. But really, I encourage you to have an open mind. I have seen great results. And as this graph or illustration more or less shows on your right on the slide, if you only run on exact match, and look at the bottom, you're only capturing small fractions of the queries that you're eligible to run on in your category, right? And as you expand to phrase match, you expand the amount of queries, you expand again with broad match modifier. And then in the last circle, the outer circle, you have broad match, and that's really where you capture all, the upper funnel queries, different ways people are searching for your products. And that's really what's important to keep in mind here. Because if there's one thing that's true throughout time and space, or at least since the internet was invented and e-commerce was introduced to it, people have always been looking for products, but the way that they search for products is constantly changing. And you don't want to lose out on customers because you don't have the right match type in your account. So the way to look at broad match is really, you can expand reach, or you can expand the number of queries, but you also, on the other hand, you want to make sure that you are only capturing the ones that are relevant, and that's where smart bidding comes into play. Because if you have broad match, then more or less say, and you're eligible to run on everything in this category. You put smart bidding on top of it, and smart bidding, what it does is try to figure out, okay, well, which of all of these queries are actually relevant in order for me to hit the advertiser's target. And that's really where we move into the next slide here, which kind of covers and goes into a little more of the nitty-gritty on, like, okay, fine, broad match expands, but how do I control the performance? That's really with smart bidding. So again, in the illustration to the right, we start from the bottom. You see that people are searching for women's hats in exact match. There's a bid for 2.6. There's a slightly lower bid once you move to phrase match, which hats for women's. You have window women's hat and broad match modifier. Again, you expand to the circle further south, the outer circle. You start from the right. You have summer white straw hat in broad match, and you bid 0.4. You have hats for adventurous ladies. You bid 0.3. But then notice that someone is looking or searching for a return hat, and you don't bid. And that's really the beauty of smart bidding. Because what smart bidding is doing is using all the signal it has to make predictions in real time. How likely is this person to convert, and how much are they likely to spend? And once we know that, we know, or the smart bidding algorithm knows, how it should set bids. If it should bid up, or it should bid down, or if it should bid at all. And as you can see, once you expand to broad match, because there's less competition, what we often find is that advertisers are able to find more customers and more sales and more conversions at the same or sometimes a lower price due to low competition, because most of our advertisers still aren't running on broad match. So there's a huge opportunity here. And just to visualize it even further, what you're doing is, with one hand, you're opening up the gates with broad match. You more or less saying, here are everything. Like, you can run on everything within this category, but you're using smart bidding to make sure that you control the performance to only run on the queries that are relevant. And that means that suddenly smart bidding can be way more selective in terms of which queries and how aggressive it wants to bid in order to hit your targets. There's a lot more flexibility because now I have a ton of data to play with, so to say. And if you look at the graph in the middle, it kind of illustrates at the bottom you have exact match that's capturing low funnel queries. Then you have phrase and BMM, which means broad match modifier, capturing mid funnel queries. And then in the top, you have broad match really capturing all the upper funnel queries with high intent. So what I encourage you to do is to, don't leave any sales on the table because of match types. Make sure you have the match type. You make sure you have smart bidding on top of it, so you're bidding competitively and you're not bidding on queries that aren't relevant for your business. So it's very simple, and we've seen so many good results, as I said before. So it's definitely worth a test or try. And when it comes to test and trying or implementing, for that sake, there's really two ways to get started. One way is just to implement directly. It's super easy. Find a campaign that is doing well, preferably a generic campaign. That's where we see the biggest headroom. Usually there's not that much headroom in branded campaigns, but find a generic campaign, find an ad group that is doing well. But you don't have to pause the broad match keywords or the phrase match keyword or whatever. Just add the same keyword as broad match and you monitor for a few weeks. If it's hitting your target, that's fantastic. If not, you have to do a little bit of optimization work, improve the ads a little bit, and then hopefully it will hit the target for your ad group. That's the simplest way to get started. Now, if for some reason you want to test, you can also do a draft and experiment. The only thing you'll have to do is to create it. And in order to create it, you will have a control campaign, which is your existing campaign, and an experiment campaign, which is the campaign where you added all the keywords that you have in the control as broad match in the experiment. Super simple again, that's it. But I'm gonna get into the nitty-gritty of how exactly to set it up, because it can be a bit complicated. But before we set it up, the three things you have to remember when it comes to best practices. So this is based on all of the tests that we've done. You have to use smart bidding. It goes without saying. It's the only way that you can control the bids for all new queries that are coming in and make sure that you actually hit your target, whether it's cost per acquisition, return on advertising spend, whatever it might be. Smart bidding is controlling the performance. We saw it in the slides before. It is crucial to be successful here. Secondly, monitor the performance. What usually happens is that once you start running on a lot of new queries, the ads that you've written has been written for exact match or phrase or BMM, which means that they are not targeting all the new queries that are coming in. So you have to monitor what new queries am I running on that I weren't running on before. And then you have to optimize them. And it's really easy with responsive searches because you have 15 headlines and 4 descriptions. And even if you're a rock star and you used all of the 15 headlines and the 4 descriptions, you can create a new RSA and make sure that you optimize towards new broad match queries that are coming in. It is crucial. Like, try to just imagine someone searching for adventurous hats for ladies and all they get is a headline that says women's hats. Like, you can do way better than that, and you should do better. And that is actually one of the biggest pitfalls when we see tests that are not performing. Is the fact that people don't follow up. So once the test has started, they start collecting data, they don't optimize continuously, because you have to take into account that you spend years optimizing the other campaigns. You now have a completely new match type, a lot of new data. You have to optimize it as well. Then, of course, you need to make sure that there's adequate budget. You're going to run on more queries. You're going to get more clients and customers and sales and conversions and everything. It's great for your business, but it also means that you're increasing your investment. And as long as you're having a good return on advertising spend, everything should hopefully be fine. But make sure you have a headroom, or make sure you have a buffer so you can add more budget to the campaigns before you start the test. And that leads me on to the exciting part, at least if you're a search specialist, that is the test itself. How do you set it up in draft and experiment? So as I said, you have to find an existing campaign, preferably 3 to 5, and that's just it. You then create an experiment campaign, which means you have a control, that's the existing campaign, and you have an experiment campaign, which is the test. And the only difference between those things is you have to add all the keywords you have in the control group in the experiment campaign as broad match. Now, if you have 10 keywords in the control, you have to add the same 10 in broad match. Like, you can't just leave it with like adding 1 or 2 broad match keywords. It needs to be identical, the amount of keywords and the keywords that you used. Once you've done that, I recommend setting up a 50-50% budget split and a cookie split in the settings. 50-50% is it's a good number. It means that, you don't rock the boat too much. 50% of your budget goes to the control, business as usual, 50% goes to the new one. If you're sensitive to fluctuation or for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can do 80-20%, you can do 90-10%. Just keep in mind that the test might take longer, and ask yourself the question, what is the opportunity cost? What if this is working, but it's taking me a few extra weeks to get to the result before Black Friday, before the holidays? So I'll encourage you to do 50-50. If you can do that, do whatever you feel comfortable with. That's why the budget split is there. It's a great setting. Once you start, you'll approximately have 1 week of learning period. Now, it's very important to keep in mind, learning period, on one hand, you have the control campaign, business as usual, it's running with 100 miles a second. It's just everything is ramped up. On the other hand, you have the experiment campaign, and that's where most people make a mistake, because they start evaluating whether or not Broadmatch is working within a week. And to compare to something that is maybe more tangible, if you and I were running, we're competing against each other, and there was a starting line, you would probably stand like the starting line, and once the shot goes off, you'll start running and you have to accelerate. And to compare it with this, then I would be coming from behind with maybe, I don't know, 30 or 40 meters at full speed. So I'll hit the starting line running while you have to accelerate. And that's really the big difference. So that's why sometimes you'll see the Broadmatch campaign could be a bit behind, but it will pick up quickly within a week and sometimes a few days. Just have to keep in mind that the Broadmatch campaign is ramping up on keywords, on ads, on smart bidding, and so forth. But once it's ramped up, you usually reach statistical significance within 4 to 6 weeks. Make sure that you're measuring the right metrics from the get-go. So the metrics shouldn't be, is my CTR going up, CPC going down, or whatever it might be. It should be, am I getting more conversions at the same price or at a lower price? Am I getting more sales, more revenue, like the business objectives? Because that is what smart bidding is optimizing towards. It's not optimizing towards a lot of proxy metrics. It's optimizing towards your business objectives. And it's not optimizing on keyword level, it's optimizing on campaign level. So you have to look at the overall. And when you start looking at it, when you reach statistical significance, remember to take into account the conversion lag, the time it takes from someone views or clicks on your ad to they end up actually buying something on your website. If you don't know what it is, you can go inside Google Ads and the UI, the user interface, click on attribution, and it'll give you a lot of insights about the distribution of how many users buy within a certain amount of time after they've seen or clicked on one of your ads. The reason why that's important, if you know it, that's great. If you don't know, I'm just going to spend a few seconds, is that that if you just measure from the end date, so today I'm going to end it, and that's it. And if your conversion lag is 1 week, then you've got to leave out a lot of conversions that haven't been reported yet. So you have to wait until the conversion lag is done, and it will retrospectively be reported to the right dates in the campaign. So that's the only thing you need to make sure of. And that brings me to implementation tips and guides. Now, make sure that you have at least 60 conversions in the campaign that you're testing on, because you want 30 conversions in the control and 30 conversions in the experiment campaign. It's not black and white. If it's a few less, slightly less, it's okay, but it needs to be around 60 for the sake of, getting the results in a timely manner. Make sure that your ads are continuously optimized and they are, like, as we discussed before, really performing well. You can look at the ad string for RSAs. Usually what I see is that they might go from excellent to good or from good to average, and then you have to optimize them for all the new queries that are coming in, making sure that they're really performing well. Make sure you convert all the keywords in the control as Broadmatch in the experiment. This is usually where things go a bit south. People forget to do it, so they're not measuring like the right keywords. They're measuring some of the keywords, which really isn't saying anything. Do the budget split 50-50, use a cookie split. There's no right or wrong here. If you rather use a search split, that's fine. If you rather use 80-20% for whatever reason, that's okay as well. And then make sure that you understand that once you start the test, that it is ramping up keywords, ads, and the likes, and smart bidding. So you shouldn't be too quick on the trigger when you're evaluating it. And as I said, continuously optimize ads, make sure you have the right extensions, conclude results after 6 to 8 weeks, maybe less, depends on how much data you have before you reach statistical significance. Factor in the conversion lag. If you do that, you're safe, you're all good to go. And that brings me to my last slide, which is the FAQ, frequently asked questions. So one of the questions that I get a lot is, if we run on broad match, won't it just start running on every query that aren't relevant and so forth? And it just, it ties back to what I've said before. Smart bidding is the thing you need on top of broad match to make it work, because that will control the performance. Other people have asked, like, what's the difference between DSA and broad match keyword? And it's very simple. DSA is only targeting queries that are relevant to the page content. So it's crawling your content and finding queries that are matching that content. Whereas broad match goes a bit broader and finds queries that aren't necessarily tied to your page content, but is relevant for your product. So what I usually say, it's not one or the other. You should run with both to maximize as much coverage as possible. Another great question that I get a lot is, what about brand safety, making sure you don't show up on keywords that you don't want to show up on. Don't use negative keywords to control performance. It's like a don't. Do use negative keywords if you find something in the search term report that you're not happy with. In my experience, it's very rare that something crazy happens after you use broad match. And the reason why is that if you're already running with broad match modifier, you have an extensive negative keyword list that will cover the majority of the edge cases. There might be a few edge cases that you might not have, but it's very rare in all the tests we've done. So I would be cautious, monitor, but there's no reason to be concerned about it, because it haven't been a big issue, and I don't predict that'll be a big issue, but keep an eye on it. Then the last question, which is a really, really good question, and that's really, should I create new campaigns? How do I go about account structure? There's no right or wrong. Again, it's a matter of preferences. What I'll encourage you to do is consolidate, and there's two reasons why I would encourage you to do that. One, you simplify the account management, so you save a ton of time on account management. It's less complex, it's more simple. Two, the more data you consolidate into the same ad groups and campaigns, the better performance you also have, because the smart bidding and algorithms and all of that jazz, it feeds off getting as much data as possible, right? So you don't want to isolate things. You don't want to have a campaign for each match type. What I've seen work really well is advertisers. Some of the most advanced ones, they just moved to broad match only. Others have kept exact and broad match, so they kind of consolidate the phrase and BMM. Again, that's a decision you need to make. But I've seen a lot of things work, but they all were tied to consolidating. So please do consolidate all of your campaigns. Now, this has been a quick run through match types, how broad match and smart bidding works, how to set up the test, best practices, pitfalls, implementation tips, and frequently asked questions. Now, as I said in the beginning, have an open mindset, test it. If you're not comfortable with doing a test, you can tweak the budget split so you don't spend that much of your budget on the test. But what I'll say is, I have plenty of agencies and advertisers. Some of them just implemented right away and saw great results. Others have done drafting experiments. The majority of the tests have been very positive. So I encourage you to give it a try. It's really not that difficult. Just make sure you have the right settings, as we discussed earlier. And please do share your learnings and your insights. I'm very curious to hear if you have any insights that are interesting. My team and I have been working on this for 8 months across Northern Europe. And if you want to get started with it, reach out to your point of contact at Google and ask for help with a broad match strategy. We're here to help you and help you succeed. And as I said, you don't want to lose out on valuable conversions and sales and conversion value or leads or whatever it might be, because you don't have the right match type. So give it a try, have an open mind, test, learn, be among the best in your industry. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was valuable and worth your time. And have a wonderful day. Best regards, Nima.